Hola exploradores. Hoy te ofrecemos el quinto tema del curso de iniciación a la inteligencia artificial. Este curso lo ofrece LinkedIn Learning, plataforma educativa de pago a la que puedes acceder desde tu perfil de LinkedIn. La propiedad y los derechos de este curso gratuito son de LinkedIn. En este tema aprenderemos a identificar patrones, entenderemos cómo se clasifican los datos, exploraremos los datos de clúster y nos sumergiremos en el emocionante mundo del aprendizaje reforzado, una rama de la inteligencia artificial que se basa en la interacción de un agente con su entorno. Estas habilidades y conceptos son fundamentales en el análisis de datos y la inteligencia artificial, y te proporcionarán una base sólida para comprender y aplicar estas técnicas en diversos campos. Recuerda activar los subtítulos si lo consideras necesario. Ya está todo listo para comenzar.
As humans, we classify things all the time. We put our Microsoft Word docs into folders, we separate our business contacts from our personal contacts, we list out things alphabetically. Without these classifications, we'd have a hard time organizing the data. Businesses need to organize the data the same way. Airline companies want to classify their customers by frequent flyers. Retailers want to classify their highest spenders. Search engines want to classify the likelihood you'll buy something online. Binary classification is one of the most popular supervised machine learning challenges. That's because it's simple and it's powerful. With binary classification, there are only two possible outcomes. Is the hotel room going to be booked next week? Will the stock market go up this afternoon? Is this email message spam? All binary classification uses supervised machine learning. Remember that supervised learning depends on labeled data. That means that the machine learning system is trained to classify the two answers. So to use these systems, you need to first create a training data set. Credit card fraud detection systems are one of the most popular ways to use binary classification. Every time you use your credit card, a machine learning algorithm classifies your transaction as fraud or not fraud. Since this is supervised machine learning, the credit card companies had to start out with tens of thousands of examples of fraudulent transactions. The data science team would train the system on how to recognize the patterns in future transactions. Email providers use supervised machine learning to classify spam messages. They start with a labeled training set of messages marked as spam. Once the network processes enough messages, it'll classify your spam email. These techniques are inputting massive amounts of data and then using machine learning algorithms to classify your data into human-created categories. Categories like booking data, fraudulent transactions, and unwanted email. A data scientist creates these categories, and then your AI system classifies the data that has been trained to recognize. Now, classification is one of the most popular forms of machine learning, but it also takes a lot of upfront effort to train the system. It can be a challenge to get tens of thousands of fraudulent credit card transactions or tens of thousands of spam email messages. Plus, there's no guarantee that'll be enough for the system to make accurate predictions. That means your data science team might find itself going back and getting another 10,000 transactions. Your team will have to feed the machine learning algorithm until it's extremely accurate at classifying your data. That's why even now, after several years of development, your credit card company might send you a fraud warning, even though it's not a fraudulent transaction. Data scientists are constantly training these systems to make the classifications more accurate. Credit card fraud, spam detection, and online purchasing might all seem like very different challenges. But to your machine learning system, they're all just different ways of doing the same thing. You're classifying your labeled data into predefined categories. Classifying your data doesn't fit every challenge. For starters, the system won't always have access to massive amounts of labeled data. So sometimes you want to have the system create its own data clusters. Clusters are when the machine uses unsupervised learning to create its own groups of data. If you've ever bought something online, you might notice that the store will include something called frequently bought together. Maybe you're buying a computer mouse and it recommends a keyboard. This is a very powerful feature, and it helps customers find what they need and increases sales for the company. This is an example of a system using unsupervised learning to create clusters based on what it sees in your purchasing history. The big difference between clustering and classifying is whether you're working with human-created categories or machine-created groups. In general, if you're using supervised learning, you're classifying. And if you're using unsupervised learning, then you're clustering. Think of it this way. Every Halloween, my son goes trick-or-treating. This is when kids wear costumes and go around the neighborhood to get candy. At the end of the evening, my son comes home with hundreds of little pieces of candy. The first thing he wants to do is classify the candy by what he likes the best. Now, in the past, my son has benefited from my experience. I've been able to supervise his learning. I can help him create output categories for the candy, such as chocolate, peanut butter, mints, and gummies. Then he does his best to classify some of the unknown candies into these categories. This would be the same as supervised machine learning. Now, he also has grandparents that live in a different country. They feel bad that they can't participate in trick-or-treating, so each year they send a bag of Serbian candy. With this bag, we can't use supervised learning because it's unlabeled. Neither he or I have ever seen the candy before, and the wrappers are in Cyrillic. So in this case, he does a form of unsupervised learning. He looks at the bag and creates his own clusters. He does this based on his own study of the data. He might create a cluster based on the candy size or the color. In fact, one year, he created a cluster that I'd never considered. It was a small cluster that he called perfume candy, made from roses and orange blossoms. This is a key part of unsupervised learning. Like my son, the machine studies the data and then comes up with its own clusters. One of the biggest advantages of clustering is that there's a lot more unlabeled data. There's a lot of candy in the world that I've never seen. So I'm not going to be able to create these output categories. There are also many ways that you might want to use machine learning to create clusters. You might want to have your machine learning algorithms cluster your customers. Then a human can go through and see if there's any patterns. At first glance, these clusters might not seem important. They may even seem trivial. But keep in mind that some of the largest companies are built around creating data clusters. Companies like Amazon, Netflix, and Twitter are all using machine learning to cluster your friends, your search history, and buying habits. These systems see patterns that would be impossible for a human to create. Online music is close to a $30 billion industry. And if you think about it, it's kind of a strange business. A lot of times you can buy the same songs from Apple Music, Spotify, or Tidal. So why would you want to sign up for one service over the other? For most people, this has to do with the power of their recommendation system. A lot of these systems started off by using unsupervised machine learning. They would recommend songs the same way that online retailers would say things were frequently bought together. But the best music libraries don't just want you to buy things together. Many of them want you to discover something new. So for that, you have to use a different form of machine learning. This form of machine learning is called reinforcement learning. These are machine learning algorithms that use rewards as a way to give the system incentive to find new patterns. A few years ago, Google used reinforcement learning to teach artificial intelligence systems how to play video games. Their AI systems beat expert players at Pong, Atari, and even more modern video games. But reinforcement learning can do much more than just play video games. These systems can improve over time by setting a series of goals and rewards. Think of it this way. Spotify Discover Weekly compares your favorite songs with a bunch of related songs. The machine learning algorithm tracks every time you click and play a song. It also keeps track of how long you listen. The data scientists design the algorithm so that every time you click a related song, it gets a tiny digital reward. It's almost like money for the machine learning system. It gets this reward coin when you click on the recommended song. Then the longer you listen, the more the reward increases. So it gets a reward coin for every minute that you listen to the song. These algorithms often use something called Q learning. This type of reinforcement learning helps create more sophisticated rewards. In Q learning, there are set environments or states. There are also possible actions that can respond to the states. In Q learning, you want the machine to improve the quality of the outcome, which is represented by the letter Q. In this case, you'd start with a Q of 0. Then you'd have the machine learn the actions that improve its conditions. The state of Q would go up each time you clicked a song. You can almost think of Q learning like the system's bank account. It can earn a bunch of coins and then see the balance grow. Once the reward system is set up, it'll look for patterns to try and increase its Q learning bank account. So if it sees a pattern where people who like one song might listen to another, it'll exploit that and make sure to put that song on your Discover Weekly. Reinforcement learning systems work best when your organization wants to do more than just cluster items that are frequently bought together. With reinforcement learning, your organization can build a system that thinks creatively about what your customer can discover.